Good afternoon, everyone. My name is AP Anderson. I'm a research and instruction librarian at Velma Waters Library at Texas A&M University-Commerce. And today we're going to be talking about how to begin a research project. If you've been doing research for a while, this is probably going to be something of a refresher, but hopefully there's going to be something in here that can be a useful tip, or if nothing else, a way to try to not get overwhelmed before the project even starts. One of the most important steps is that you have to know exactly what's being asked of you when you're doing any research project. This is going to be particularly important if you are doing this for a class or if you're doing something that you're going to attempt to publish in a journal. We're going to be focusing more on research for classroom assignments, but I am going to talk a little bit about, very briefly, about some of the differences in the process if you're doing this for publication. So first, one of the things that we're going to talk about is you need to not be afraid to ask questions, especially if this is something that you're doing for an assignment. Sometimes students will be afraid that they are bothering their instructor or they're asking a silly question. This is not the case. This is a situation where if you have a question or something that you need clarified about the assignment, it's really likely that there are other people that have the same thing. And if enough people ask, the professor might be able to take time and issue like a larger statement to help address everybody's questions. I always like to recommend that students ask these questions by email, just because time may pass between when you ask your professor and when you're actually doing the assignment. And it's really good to have that written clarification in front of you that you can refer to, in addition to the parameters of the assignment. Due dates are important to keep in mind, of course, not just the final end product, but if there are any draft deadlines along the way that you need to be advised of so that you can prepare to how to schedule your research process. Also, be very clear. Are you going to be expected to conduct your own research for this assignment, your own primary research, or are you mostly gathering research other people have done? The first one takes way longer and has way more steps in it. The next step, once you are aware of what you're going to do and what is being asked, you need to start figuring out what your topic is. And this is something that can get a little bit overwhelming, especially if you have a very open-ended assignment. Some instructors, just like a list of topics to choose from. Other professors will basically say, give me something. And there is a really wide spectrum in between those. So I'm going to give some examples about how to generate ideas for a research project. Pardon the crazy mind map that's concept map that's happening there. But this is just one example of how you can explore a topic and get down to the specific aspect of it you want to focus on. It's always best to find a topic for a research assignment that you actually care about on some level. You don't have to be in love with it, but it is something that you're going to be spending a lot of time with. And the writing process can kind of feel like pulling teeth if you're stuck with a topic that doesn't mean anything to you. But if you're interested in it, or you're passionate about it, or even you have some curiosity and want to learn more, that makes the whole process from beginning to end a lot more enjoyable. Brainstorming is a great tactic for drilling down what you need to do. Free writing is when you just try to write down as many different options for a topic as you have, as you can think of. It doesn't have to be good. Write down anything. You're going to throw away 99% of them. As long as you are figuring out, all the different permutations of it, your mind is working in the background to draw connections between them and find something that's interesting. Concept mapping is as illustrated by my art history topic diagram that I've got over there. You start asking yourself questions about a topic. So I have a poster of Paul Revere in my office, and he has a really interesting outfit. He's got a plain white shirt that is unbuttoned like halfway down and an open vest. It's so casual. And he's, like a founding father. And I wondered, why did he dress like that to have a painting painted of him? That's a lot of money that he spent to basically be dressed like he's just bumming around the house. And so that made me wonder, what is he communicating in that idea? And so I started asking myself questions, and I built out all of these different sub questions. And it gets to the point where you jump from topic to topic, find the connections between ideas, and try to get down to the meat of what you actually want to write about. So, for example, Paul Revere and his fun little shirt. Obviously, he paid for this. Obviously, he's got the money for it. He does end up being a historical figure later on, so people are going to see his face. By the way, he looks a lot like Jack Black. But so he's communicating information about who he is. He's a silversmith, and he's painted with one of the teapots that he's created. But also, he's saying something about who he is as a person. He's not a stiff upper lip aristocrat who gets painted in his best clothes buttoned up to the throat. He's kind of a casual common man who is an artisan, somebody who works with his hands. But the fact that we have a picture of him at all is saying something about things that are left out of the picture. Also, side point, anytime you can just get stuck, I really recommend talking through your research topic to a friend. There is, and it doesn't actually have to be a real person. There is an idea that I borrowed from our friends in the computer science field called the rubber duck process. If you can explain your topic or whatever it is that's causing you problems to a rubber duck, like the bath toy, eventually in talking about it, even though the rubber duck isn't answering you, you will figure out what piece of information is missing. And just like that, you have your solution. That can be a way that you can get down to the core question that you want to research. So up next, you're going to do something a little bit counterintuitive. You're going to start doing research before you're ready to do research. And the sources that you find might be things that you never look at again. But it's important to do this early on in the process because you want to know what's out there. You don't want to end up committing yourself to a topic that nobody has ever researched before, and then you have nothing that you can cite. Unless you're doing original research, in which case you're in a better position there than somebody who's just trying to do an analysis of the existing sources. So once you kind of have a general idea of what you're going to talk about, go on Google Scholar or a library database, or even just regular Google, and just kind of brush over the top of the concept and try to figure out, what are people talking about? Are there the kind of sources available that I'm going to need for my assignment? If you're writing about a historical period and you were really hoping that you could draw on newspaper articles that were published at the time of the event, you might discover that nobody has archival copies of the newspaper that you want from the city you want from 1824. Maybe they didn't have a newspaper in that town during that year, or maybe the archive burned down. Sometimes the information sources we want aren't available, and we have to backtrack, figure out a new direction, and not let it stop us. So while you're doing this kind of overview of the topics and the information that's available, try to take note of anything that sparks your interest along the way. If there are angles that people are using to talk about the issue, is any of that something that you think you would be able to talk about too? Either in a direction of, oh yes, this is very interesting, or that's really weird, I don't know why they're talking about it from that direction. Again, you want to find something that makes you curious, something that doesn't feel like just busy work. You want to find some angle to it that you can connect to. And this is a really good stage for figuring out the landscape. So once you are doing some of this, I recommend taking notes in some sort of electronic format so you can go back to the sources if you need to, but with the knowledge that you might just never return to this if your direction veers in a different way. And so you're going to take these pre-research notes, and you're going to take your brainstorming map, your free writing, your list of ideas, your conversation you had with your friend or your rubber duck, and you're going to say, okay, so what can't I do? Are there any ideas that I've thought about that I don't think I could find any sources for? things that are way more boring than I thought they were before I started looking in? Or is there something that I want to incorporate in, some new angle, some new piece of the puzzle? Can I provide a CJ concept for this example in terms of pre-research? Apologies, I'm reading from the chat. Yes, pre-research. So if you're doing this from a criminal justice standpoint, and you're wanting to figure out if a particular kind of intervention stops juvenile offenders from reoffending and getting caught back up in the system, and it's like some really new intervention that hasn't really been tried before, and your task for your research paper is finding established research, you may find that that intervention hasn't been studied in enough depth for you to write a paper on it based on the sources that are currently published. That's one of the problems in academic publishing. It takes a really long time for somebody to get every step of the research process, to do a study, publish a paper, get it peer reviewed, and get it shared. And so there's a delay between when new ideas and concepts are being introduced to the world and when you're able to have a full body of literature about it. And so if you are somebody who is going to do your own primary research, like you're going to build a study and collect your own original data and write your own paper, that is an awesome thing to identify during the pre-research stage, because that means there's space for your research in the conversation. There's a need for you to kind of fill that gap so that other people can then build on your research. But if all you are trying to do is analyze the existing literature, that is kind of a roadblock that's kind of hard to surmount. If it hasn't been done yet and you aren't able to do it, you're probably going to have to redirect. That is going to be something to do during this stage. I recommend trying to grab some of the URLs of things that are useful to you or that catch your attention somewhere. Grab titles for them as well so you know what those URLs mean. So that if later on down the line you have to change your topic, tweak something, you find out that part of the process that you were not is not working the way that you wanted it to, you can go back to those early things, try to find whatever inspired you before, and use that to steer yourself different. Here's a little bit on original research. I said a little bit of this a moment ago, but during this stage, the pre-research is a very important part of the process. It's how you're going to identify whether or not this is a viable direction for you to go. And there is so much time, effort, and money often involved in original research that it's very important that you have a clear direction from the beginning. And even after the pre-research stage, there's going to be a literature review stage early on in your process that's much more formal, that will end up probably being a part of your writing, where you identify why this is a gap that you were trying to fill. But the early brush is still very important. During this stage, you're going to try to see, like, has this been written about to death? Has everyone and their uncle published a paper on electronic monitoring and whether that actually reduces people's likelihood of violating parole? If everyone has written an angle, their own particular take on that specific angle, you're going to have to be careful about how you do it. You can't write about it in the general, so you're going to have to find a specific population that hasn't been covered. If everyone is writing about it with adult offenders, maybe there's room to write about it with juvenile offenders or with specific types of crimes, or if there are, other additional pieces that make it more effective, like if people are getting counseling in addition to having the electronic monitoring. So it's really just figuring out the landscape of whatever the topic is and trying to find where you and your writing will fit into it. Also, during this planning stage, you're going to have to think very hard about the practicalities of how you are going to conduct this research. Are you doing a survey? Are you interviewing people? Is this something where you are actually doing laboratory research in the physical sciences? What kind of materials are you going to need? What kind of time are you going to need for each phase of this? How many people are going to be in your research team? Do you have resources available to you currently, or do you have to seek, grant funding to be able to buy stuff that you need? Are you going to have to pay people for their participation in a study? All of this is stuff that has to be considered upfront if you were doing original research, especially if you're going to be, attempting to publish this research professionally. So always try for these projects to find something reasonable that you can do within your means without overstretching yourself, because there is so much that goes into it in terms of time and effort and money that you really don't want to waste your time. You should have this effort be meaningful, and rather than kind of throwing yourself into something that you're not going to be able to complete. Additional step, we do have a resource that I want to show you guys. It is something that you would have access to through your Waters library as TAMU-C students, faculty, and staff. It's the SAGE Research Methods database, and it is very useful for showing you how all of the different research methodologies work. There are examples in there of every stage of the process, whether it's like analyzing your data using specific statistical methods or tips on how to conduct interviews effectively. They have a project planner and reading lists that you can build for yourself and then share with other people if you have them on your research team. They have a methods map showing how, for example, a scoping review and a systematic review link together as part of the same research process. And I really like their stats test, because that is the part that's most difficult for me, is figuring out, once you've collected this data, how are you actually going to analyze it and make it meaningful? So you have access to this. It is at no additional cost to you. And you can go there by going to the library website, going to the one search bar, hitting the databases tab, and just searching the name. Back to the idea that perhaps we're doing this for class. And the example is going to be another art history one. But I can talk a little bit more about it from criminal justice if you and your class would like, Dr. Tapia. So once you have your general idea, your vague sort of idea, then you're going to have to refine it. Get specific. You can get too specific, but you can always pull back if you end up not finding the kinds of sources you need. But it's always a good idea to try to get really very clear about who your population is that you're going to be addressing. If there are any specific phenomena or concepts that you're going to be talking about, or geographic location, time period, and how all of the parts fit together. And so, taking, for example, my Paul Revere painting question, I wanted to know why he dressed himself like this in his painting. And then I was like, well, I don't want to just write about Paul Revere. So how do paintings, historical portraits, talk to us about what life was like in the past? And that's super vague. You could write about anything, like, or am I talking about cave paintings? Am I talking about paintings in the 1990s? Am I talking about royal portraits from, the British royal family? Or am I talking about, caricature artists that are drawing people when they're walking at the pier down at the beach or at the circus or something? It could be anything. So I picked a time period that fit with, the American Revolution. There's a status quo change. People are getting all sorts of new ideas. People are getting more into the scientific method. They're getting more individualized. And so I kind of get all of these little pieces, and then I refine it down to, how do subjects' clothing choices in Enlightenment era portraiture communicate the period's changing values and norms? Because 100 years before Paul Revere and his portrait was painted, somebody like him would have been painted in like a full jacket and would have been very formal, but he's sitting there in his shirt sleeves, like he's just chilling at his kitchen table. And that shows that something in what he wanted to communicate to posterity has changed. And then I made myself like a little bonus extra option, because I was like, well, maybe that's still too broad. So maybe I want to talk about what this means for him as a man, or a man of society, and his idea of himself that he is trying to project. And so, because he's not in armor, he's not in a military uniform, he's not, holding a sword or standing or riding atop a horse. He's in his house holding something he made in an open vest and just kind of looking at the viewer. And he's definitely still communicating who he is in relation to society, but I want to know why. And so once you get a very specific question, then you can kind of start to limit what sources you're pulling from, because there is a concept called scope creep, which is when your research starts to get away from you and you start pulling in more details that aren't exactly related to what you were wanting. And it's very easy to go down a research rabbit hole and waste a lot of your time. But if you're very clear about what your parameters are, you can ruthlessly eliminate anything that is irrelevant to you. I'm a very big proponent in telling students that your time is valuable and you should not do things that are going to waste your time. Sometimes those fun little research rabbit holes will connect you with another topic that you want to explore later in a future paper for a future assignment. But other times it can just be a distraction. So I don't like to give people like, don't do this, like hard and fast rules, but just be aware. Sometimes it can be tempting to go off into the weeds. So next, we're going to talk about outlining. So once you know what your question is and you know what you want to do with it, you need to figure out how many sources you need for each piece of it, what kind of questions you're going to be asking at every stage. And I like to imagine it as a situation where I am creating little boxes into which all of my sources will fit. And it is going to be very subject to change. Please don't at any point get yourself married to your question or your outline, because as you find more information, this may need to shift. So from there, I have kind of created some general questions that I wanted to answer with my hypothetical historical portraiture project. I know that I'm going to need some resources to help me along the way with this. I need to know what kind of shirt that is that he's wearing, what kind of vest that is, how to use the terms for it. I would love pictures so I can identify them in the portraits that I'm looking. I'm also going to need some portraits to compare. I've figured out some people I want to look up. I know that I am going to need to look up how to cite images if I include those in my paper. And I also have kind of sub-questions that I'm going to need to address with my research at every stage. And sometimes the sub-questions narrow you. So I've got my time frame very specifically set down, but other times your sub-questions will open you up. So if I wanted to establish that portraits are a way of communicating information about people, that kind of source that is being written by an art historian is probably not going to be limited to any specific time period, or it might be a different time period than what I want. So I kind of give myself permission. If I am establishing one of the bigger, broader concepts, I can step outside of my very specific time frame and geographical range to establish the facts that I'm going to back up with more specific proof later. Because one of the truths of research is that there is no such thing as a perfect source. No one paper is going to address every single facet of what you're wanting to talk about. If it did, you wouldn't need to write yours because theirs already exists. So you're going to kind of scaffold together your argument from lots of different pieces, some of which are a little bit outside of your standard scope. But I also want to leave myself open for future exploration if something becomes relevant. Like, how does the artist's perspective shape our understanding of these people relative to just the subjects themselves? So it just, again, it's a little bit more brainstorming, but it's just kind of knowing what specifically you will need so that you don't just run into an academic database and hope for the best. So this is an important reminder and one that I have to tell myself every time I work on a project like this. Setbacks are going to happen. They are not the end of the world, and you should expect that they're going to be there. You might come up with a perfect research question that is exactly what you want to write about. You write yourself a beautiful outline. You know all of the boxes you need to fill with the sources that you need to have back up your argument. And then you realize, man, there's not as much research on this as I thought there was. Or half the people that I'm wanting to cite in this don't agree with me. This is a situation taking into account from criminal justice perspective. If you're wanting to argue, we talked about the specific hypothetical intervention that stops juvenile offenders from reoffending. If you're wanting to argue that that is an effective intervention to help people in that population, and you get into it and you realize that all of the research says that this is not an intervention that works, that is something that is telling you you need to reevaluate your approach. And without, the ability to do your own primary research and do a study on that yourself, that's a situation where you may need to tweak your research question and maybe even tweak the direction of your paper as a whole. And that doesn't mean that you have wasted your time. That just means that you have entered into one of the back loops of the research process. It's not a straight line. You're going to get into a situation where sometimes you'll need to step forward and sometimes you'll need to step back. Sometimes you'll need to step to the side. It's going to be a kind of twisting, convoluted process, and that's normal. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. Even if you end up having to go back to the very beginning and start from scratch, you've learned something from that, and you're going to go forward with a stronger topic. The whole purpose of developing a strong research question, which is going to be a future workshop I do just on the question itself, is to guide your research process. It's to make sure that the evidence that you're finding is related to your question and that it supports whatever argument you are trying to make or provides an answer to whatever problem you're trying to solve. It isn't something that binds you to that particular version of the assignment or that particular version of the research. You're in control, and you can rewrite the question as many times as you need to until it is exactly what you need it to be. It's a tool to help you. It isn't something that's there to limit you. So in general, always try to be kind to your future self. It can be really tempting to do procrastination. I am personally awful about waiting until the last minute to do things. Personally, I have found that I can write an entire paper in a fairly short amount of time. I cannot research an entire paper in a fairly short amount of time. So if you end up with less time than you hope to do a project, try to pad more time into the research phase of it to account for if you run into a dead end or a new direction that you end up liking a lot better. And then maybe if you have to, trying to actually write it in a shorter time frame. It's good to keep a schedule. I recommend putting these either in a planner or like an actual like Google Calendar or something that can give you notifications. And just make sure though that those deadlines are reasonable. Don't go in and say, okay, so I got my assignment today and I'm going to have my topic tomorrow and I'm going to have my research done by the day after tomorrow. Please build in extra time. Life happens. You cannot be researching 24/7, nor should you try. You need to sleep. You need to socialize with people. You need to eat food and go to class and do all of the other things that make you a full person. But also, you don't want to end up in a situation where you're trying to do 2 weeks worth of research in a night. Just know that there are people that are there to help you in a university environment. I am one of those people, as are my other library colleagues, but you also have other people that are in your network. And it's good to lean on these people during the research process. Your instructors are there to help you. They don't want you to write a bad essay, so they're going to want to answer your questions. They're going to want to make sure their instructions are clear. You're worried about your writing, or you're worried that you're not doing the statistics for your data gathering correctly. Go see some tutors. The Tutoring Center and the Writing Center are awesome resources to help you with these projects, but also don't underestimate the power of having your friends and your family in your corner. If you get stuck, you can talk to them about it. It's really good for getting over writer's block, but also complaining can be really important too. It can, get that stress off of your chest and get you ready to move on to the next phase, rather than just kind of feeling like it's all bunched in. Here are some of the research and instruction team that we have. We have a new librarian, Emily. Please, anytime you have questions about this, feel like you can reach out to us by email or at the library itself. But we want to make this process as easy for you as possible. So if you get stuck, you don't know if a source is good, you don't know how to navigate a database, you're having a really hard time figuring out your keywords or a search strategy or what databases you even want to use, this is all stuff that we are happy to help talk to you about. thank y'all for coming to this. I really appreciate it. And this recording is going to be uploaded to YouTube after the fact, and I will send it out to everybody that registered so that you can have that recording.